I don't really want to get into why I agreed to the study, but the truth is, I was desperate. I had lost my job recently and needed quick cash. Over the years, I've participated in various research studies and medical trials for money, but this one seemed different. It seemed easier. It promised a lot, and I didn't have many options left. So, when I came across an ad for a medical study paying surprisingly well, I signed up without thinking too much about it. I didn't consider the consequences, didn't ask enough questions. I should have known better. The building I arrived at was massive. It looked like an institution. The exterior was gray and imposing, like something out of a science fiction movie. I had a hard time finding the right entrance, and once inside, the long, identical white hallways all meshed together in my mind. I felt disoriented and out of place as I wandered, trying to find room 312. My mind raced. What had I gotten myself into? The sterile environment made my skin crawl. I was late, which didn't help. The staff, however, was kind, polite, and completely unfazed by my tardiness. They told me it wasn't a problem, that I wasn't the first person to get lost. One of the nurses led me down a hallway, and as she spoke to me, I noticed how monotone her voice was, like she was reading from a script. I should have paid more attention to that, but my mind was elsewhere. I had to do this. I needed the money. They explained that the study was about déjà vu, those strange, fleeting moments when you feel like you've experienced something before. The researchers were studying it as a brain glitch, something to do with an area of the brain that they had isolated. The procedures seemed simple enough, even though I wasn't entirely comfortable with it. The microchip they planned to insert was supposed to cause a minor, constant stress to that part of the brain, making déjà vu more likely to occur. They said all I had to do was record the moments when it happened, note the triggers, and note the patterns that emerged. They would use this information to help induce an episode of déjà vu inside the lab, and then study the phenomenon further. It didn't sound so bad at the time. I didn't really care about the research. I just wanted the money. I signed the consent forms, and the procedure was done right then and there. I can still feel the memory of it vividly. The cold, sterile table, the soft murmur of the staff as they worked around me, the strange sense of detachment I felt as the needle went in. They assured me it would be quick, and it was. But it was also nerve-wracking to be awake while something was being implanted inside my head. The sensation of it, I can't even describe it. It was just uncomfortable and invasive. The mild ache I had afterward was expected. It was one of the side effects they warned me about. The others included nausea, insomnia, phantom smells, confusion, and an increased heart rate during an episode. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured those were just typical risks that came with the territory. I should have listened to the little voice in the back of my head telling me to leave. But the money, the quick cash, I couldn't ignore that. A week later, the first déjà vu episode hit. I was making my morning coffee, a simple, mundane task that I had done 1,000 times before. The comforting scent of coffee beans filled the air as I started the machine, took the cream out of the fridge, and grabbed my mug. The routine was familiar, calming, but the moment I poured the coffee, something shifted. It wasn't just déjà vu. It was more intense, like I had been transported back in time and was reliving the exact moment. Every movement, every detail, I had experienced this before. I was watching myself in a loop, trapped in this surreal moment. I could feel it in my bones, in the pit of my stomach, a rush that overwhelmed me. But when I finished pouring the coffee, the feeling didn't fade. It lingered. I felt disoriented, my vision going blurry. I picked up the mug, expecting the rich, familiar taste of coffee, but when I took a sip, it wasn't coffee at all. It was pure cream. The shock hit me instantly. My body stiffened as I stared at the mug in disbelief. I had just poured coffee, hadn't I? I remembered picking up the pot, felt the warm ceramic, and watched the liquid flow into my cup. But now the coffee pot sat untouched, still full, and the cap to the cream bottle was on the counter. Confused, I tried to make sense of it, but the sensation of déjà vu and the creamy taste still lingered in my mind. I finally poured the cream back into the container, and with shaky hands, I made myself a proper cup of coffee. The feeling of being trapped in time was still there, gnawing at me, and it wasn't something I could explain away. I had to ignore it. I had to. I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal, but deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. I had lived that moment. I had lived it before, and yet, it wasn't real. It was impossible. 3 days later, the déjà vu returned. I was brushing my teeth before bed, just like I always do. I didn't think much of it. My mind wandered, distracted, as I moved the toothbrush across my teeth. And then, again, that rush. The overwhelming sensation that time had rewound, that I was reliving the exact moment. But this time, it was different. As the déjà vu faded, something was off. My mouth burned. It tasted foul and bitter. A sharp pain shot through my mouth, and I couldn't breathe. My heart raced, and I started to panic. I grabbed the sink, spitting out what I had in my mouth, but it wasn't saliva. It was gritty. It was powdery. I couldn't figure out what it was. My breath came in ragged gasps as I turned the water on, rinsing out my mouth, but the burning wouldn't stop. I looked at the toothbrush I was holding. It wasn't my regular toothbrush. It was the one I kept for cleaning, used with Comet, the powdered cleaner. It made sense now. The taste, the pain. I had brushed my teeth with a cleaning brush, and now my mouth was burning from it. I threw up almost immediately, my stomach revolting at the thought. This wasn't just déjà vu. This was something else entirely. I couldn't understand what was happening, and the confusion set in harder than ever before. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, thinking about the study, the chip, and the effects it was having on me. The next morning, I planned to call the research clinic, but of course, it was closed. I found out it was Saturday. I didn't know what day it was. I felt completely disconnected from reality, unsure of what was real and what was just a symptom of the chip. The third episode was the worst. The worst by far. I couldn't stay home. I felt too afraid, too paranoid. I needed to be around people, so I went to the gym, hoping that being in a public place would keep me grounded. But when the déjà vu hit again, it was worse than ever. I stepped on the Stairmaster, and everything froze. Time rewound, and I was trapped in the same moment, watching it play out. But then it didn't stop. The stairs became slippery. The sound of my feet hitting the stairs sounded different. It became a metallic clang, and the air grew cold. Rain poured down. Before I knew it, I slipped, my hands grabbing for something, anything. I was hanging off the side of a fire escape, 30 feet above the ground, terrified for my life. My hands were slipping, my legs dangled beneath me. I felt like I was going to fall to my death. With all the strength I could muster, I pulled myself up, just in time. But I couldn't explain how I got there or why everything felt wrong. I was on a fire escape, in the rain, with no idea how I had gotten there. When I finally made it down, I found my car parked on the street, the same place as yesterday. But I didn't remember parking it. I didn't remember anything. My phone was sitting on the passenger seat. I drove home, shaking, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. The next day, I went straight to the clinic. I was desperate. I begged them to remove the chip and told them what had been happening. The clinician hesitated, trying to convince me to keep it in. But I refused. I couldn't go on like this. I was losing my mind. They agreed to remove it. I sat in the same chair where they had inserted it. The same chair. The same procedure. But this time, I knew. I had already experienced this. I had already been through this before. And when the rod was inserted into my skull, I screamed. The pain was unbearable, and I realized it wasn't deja vu. This is happening right now. I had already lived through it, and now I was reliving it. I lost consciousness. When I woke up, everything was different. I wasn't in the clinic anymore. I was in an abandoned warehouse. Blood was dripping from my head. I was sitting alone, and the air was thick with the smell of mold. My hands trembled as I looked down. There was a screwdriver on the ground, covered in blood. I couldn't remember how I got there, but I was sure I had done this to myself. I found my way outside eventually. I don't know how I ended up in my car, but my phone was there. I tried calling for help, but no one answered. The clinic didn't pick up either. I drove home, my mind a mess, my head still throbbing. And now, as I sit here writing this,